Remind all of us that tonight is the eve of
Okay.
International Women's Day.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful day, and I just want to remind everybody that it's not a day for parties and celebration, but it's a day to remember our sisters who have worked as advocates for women's health justice. Started with Clara Zetkin in Germany and started in 1908, both in Germany and in New York. There were parades and marches for women's health, reproductive justice, and workers' rights and children's rights. It proceeded to 1911 when it became an international day. And so as we sit through what we're listening to tonight, we can just pay tribute to our sisters who brought us to this day. We're going to be addressing a number of issues relating to women's health. We have three, what I consider to be excellent and wonderful speakers. We're going to be speaking about some issues, the financialization of women's health, how the improper, immoral budgets influence our health, and how we may be able to adjust to that as workers advocates for women's health. As we go forward, each presenter will just go forward. I will introduce them in general right now, and they will present their information. We will not have questions and answers during the presentations. Our colleague Bonnie Gorman, who is part of the committee for Seeking Women's Health Justice, will collate and collaborate the questions, and we will ask them after the presenters are through. So please, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat and Bonnie Gorman will take care of them. Our first presenter is going to be Jamie Marcella. Jamie is a doctoral candidate at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Jamie is going to be talking about investment feminism and the financialization of women's health. For those of you in the local area and certainly around the rest of the country right now, you may be aware that beyond women's health, there's the issue going on with Stewart's Healthcare and what happened with them being private equity, profit-oriented healthcare. And Jamie will focus her discussion on women's health. After Jamie will be Jasmine Owens, and Jasmine works as a fellow with the Win Without War Education Fund. And Jasmine's going to be talking about what the Poor People's Campaign refers to as the moral budget. She's going to be talking about reprioritizing the national budget for equitable access to health care. I hope I know all of you are excited about that as I am to see what she has to say. And our last presenter is Martha Livingston. Martha Livingston is a professor at SUNY in New York. Martha has been and is a wonderful advocate for women's health and health equity and health services for all people. And Martha is going to be, I just said that as a Boston, it's Martha, not Martha. Martha is going to be discussing women's health care justice is inextricable from health justice for all. So Jamie, if you would begin, please.
Absolutely. Let me just share my screen. So first, thank you so much for having me here tonight. Thank you, Catherine. It's a real honor to be able to be in conversation with all of these wonderful speakers. But without further ado to the presentation. So my presentation today focuses on the increasing financialization within the field of women's health and its relationship to a longer history of women's health activism in the United States. And for some additional context, I'm here on behalf of the healthcare finance team of the Gender Sci Lab at Harvard University. We are a collaborative interdisciplinary research lab dedicated to generating feminist concepts, methods, and theories for scientific research on sex and gender. As a member of the healthcare finance team, I am one of many historians, philosophers, epidemiologists, and sociologists that are working to track outcomes and decode the dynamics of financial firms on the health of women and gender minorities. I myself am a historian of medicine and public health. So the work that I'm going to talk to you about today is an exploration of questions about the financialization of women's health from my perspective as a historian and a feminist science scholar. So over the past few years, scholars in a wide variety of disciplines have become interested in the rise of the financial interest in women's health, but the full scope and the potential impacts of corporate investments in this arena are still very much an open and urgent question. As my colleagues Sarah Richardson and Joseph Brooke have recently argued in The Lancet medical journal, women's health has become what they're calling the women's health industry, which is a term that refers to a range of corporations and healthcare companies that sell services, technologies, and other products that target women. And this is in contrast to the term women's health, which originated in social justice movements and for health equity in the 60s and 70s, and emphasized public education about access to and inclusion within the medical establishment. The women's health industry, however, instead primarily prioritizes business incentives and financial motives. So in other words, they prioritize profit. And within this wider umbrella of healthcare investing, financial firms have targeted women's health as an especially exciting site for investment. Women's reproductive health is a primary target. From 2010 to 2020, for example, 1,340 obstetric gynecology and fertility offices in the United States became affiliated with a private equity firm. And as a result, today, almost 30% of all fertility cycles in the United States are happening at private equity affiliated practices. And 3 of the 4 major companies that staff US obstetric emergency departments also have private equity affiliation. Another powerful space for this kind of investment, and the primary focus of the rest of my presentation, is the rise of femtech, a market with a wide umbrella that encompasses technologies that are focused on women's health. In recent years, femtech has emerged as a prime target for venture capital funding and innovation. In 2018, for example, venture capitalists contributed $620 million to the femtech industry. In 2022, VC firms invested $1.5 billion. And by 2025, the femtech sector is expected to reach a market potential of $75 billion. This proliferation of femtech startups has led to a boom in medical technologies that target women and their providers. They offer solutions to a wide variety of issues that are traditionally associated with women's health, ranging from products connected with reproductive health care and sex-specific biologies, so things like fertility, incontinence, and menopause, but also technologies developed for women's health more broadly, so certain cancers and heart disease, for example. So what is all of this investment doing for women and gender minorities? When you look at the marketing of many of these new startups, you'll something like this, step into your pumping power.
Yeah, good.
Or something like this, understand your cycle and feel your best. Or this, cultivating a world where all women can access safe and clean period care. Empowerment, access, body literacy. These are the market differentiators that they point to show their value, not only as market disruptors, but as a socially conscious business entity. And as a historian, I can't help but notice a very familiar pattern emerging, because for almost a century, women's health in one form or another has long been technologized, commodified, and a site for profit-making from the medical establishment. Yet, at the same time, there has been a real lack of investment in research for female-specific and female-prevalent diseases and conditions. The marketing rhetoric within femtech strategically draws on these causes that were championed by 20th century women's health advocates and advocates today. And they do this in order to position themselves as disruptors who offer the solution to gender inequality in the healthcare system. Yet you have to ask, are the claims these companies are making possible? Can these kinds of companies solve the problems of health inequality that they claim to? And I think the history of women's health activism is especially illuminating for understanding this question. While women's health is a really broad category and it encompasses much more than reproduction, historically, it has been associated with women's fertility and childcare. And for most of US history, the female body was defined against the quote unquote normal or neutral body, which for the medical establishment meant the male body. And by the early 20th century, the supposed pathology of female reproductive systems, combined with societal taboos surrounding sex and reproduction, as well as the rise of medicine as an elite and exclusive profession. And as a result, the first half of the 20th century placed men and women in complete deference to healthcare providers for understanding and responding to their most basic health needs surrounding menstruation, fertility, contraception, and pregnancy. Most women, but especially rural women, immigrant women, women of color, and Indigenous women, simply did not have access to their own physicians, and they became dependent on the work of public health organizations and philanthropic groups to gain access and treatment for many of their most pressing conditions. By the mid-20th century, we saw the rise of second wave feminism, and this included much women's health activism. And then, as now, there are and were many different feminisms with different priorities and goals. Some were more inclusive than others. I hate to do this as a historian, but for the sake of time and broadly speaking, in addition to the fight for reproductive justice that many of us are familiar with, women's health activists also push back against the systematicalization of female reproduction, the reducing of women's health to reproduction alone, and towards greater health equity. So by the 1990s, women's health activists were challenging the ways that the medical field had come to dominate decisions about how to define health, wellness, and the quote-unquote normal in relation to the female body. And within this feminist framework, women's health activism became associated with individual choice, educated consent, and having ultimate authority of one's own body. Yet at the same time, women's health was also an industry, pivoting towards marketing strategies that coupled a feminist emphasis on independence with products and services that promised the patient control through the self-regulation of the body. By the beginning of the 21st century, there was a real shift in appeals to feminism, where we saw many mainstream forms of feminism become quite popular, though often they were detached from any specific form of political action. And this is how phrases like girl boss or this is what a feminist looks like became something appealable enough for the masses to be seen on t-shirts and coffee mugs on the shelves at Target. Marketing like this appeals to ideals of independence and empowerment, the generic tenets of what gender scholar Sarah Bannett-Weiser has called popular feminism. Companies that adopt popular feminism in their branding promote themselves as the key to unlocking a kind of freedom and identifying yourself with feminist causes if you, as the consumer, are simply willing to purchase it. And this is also happening in women's health. They're tapping into genuine and important concerns about a lack of material investment and access. So in addition to the idea that buying the right health products and services can lead to empowerment, the women's health industry is also selling the idea of empowerment through high-level financial investment in women's health. This is what my colleagues and I have termed investment femme. And this is the idea that increased financial investment can be both a profitable activity and a means of achieving gender equity through the private sector. So in other words, it's the idea that profitable movement of capital, especially in this case, money and personal data, can drive social progress, and that the demand socially for that kind of progress should determine where financial capital is allocated. And nowhere has this kind of change been more apparent than in femtech. So we can see these ideas very clearly by examining the very top of the food chain of financialization of women's health. So my colleagues and I have looked at two of the largest femtech investment companies that present their investments in femtech as a pathway towards achieving gender equity. One is a venture investing platform that claims to create, quote, investment funds designed for women, backing innovative companies for returns and impact. They focus on early stage companies and solutions that address, as they say, women's unmet needs. And they argue that these needs have been neglected by traditional venture capitalist investors. This company initially launched in 2018, and its femtech fund has now made over 28 investments in 18 femtech companies. Similarly, the other firm we looked at's mission is to create, quote, better access, care, and outcomes in women's healthcare. And their femtech portfolio currently has 16 companies. VC's move towards femtech reflects both business imperatives and the increased cultural demand for socially minded business practices. They echo early women's health activists. These two firms argue that the women's health industry has failed to meet the needs of women because it is a male-dominated field. And because of this, they argue that the solution to gender health inequity can be found through increased representation of women, both as healthcare and tech leaders and as financial investors. And their firms position themselves as being women-led. They point to their CEOs and founders as proof that increased diversity in investing spaces leads to better, more innovative businesses. The connection to women's healthcare activism is clear. We do have a historical dearth of resources and research directed towards women's health, and we do have a historical lack of representation of women and gender and racial minorities in business leadership. But it's important to pay attention to how these issues are understood in such a highly financialized space. Regardless of their mission, every single venture capitalist firm requires a yield on investment to sustain itself, and this really shapes the conceptual frameworks and the tangible outputs of their investment. So with so much money and attention directed at the femtech sector, new startups, like the ones we were just looking at, are attempting to situate themselves in ways that appeal both to financial investors and to their potential customers, each of which have a unique and potentially contradictory stake in the promotion and development of women's healthcare. So let's look at a few more examples. In a paper that's currently in progress, my colleagues and I surveyed 100 of the top funded femtech startups from 2019. And perhaps unsurprisingly, several period product retailers were especially successful at getting funding. We looked specifically at 3 companies that were strong examples of how direct-to-consumer and traditional retail femtech rely on the idea of women's empowerment through consumer choice to promote their products. They brand themselves as women-centered alternatives to traditional corporate retailers. In claiming that traditional retailers fail to prioritize women's menstrual needs and experiences in favor of corporate profit, these companies offer a suite of period and self-care products that center menstruation as the critical and defining aspect of women's health and wellness. And all 3 companies are women-founded, which is a detail that is frequently invoked to differentiate themselves from traditional period product retailers. Like the rhetoric associated with the VC investors who fund them, this framework positions women-led companies as having more effective and healthful products and services. Making an online purchase or being a subscriber allows the consumer to invest their resources into a women-led company and thereby, theoretically at least, into the political project of women's representation in healthcare. So in this context, the act of purchasing from one of these companies over another brand becomes a consumer's active investment in the project of women's empowerment. But far from the revolutionary market disruption that it purports itself to be, these companies have repackaged a decades-long history of conflating women's empowerment with consumption and the self-regulation of the body. Driven by the need to expand, these retailers are now also selling skincare and sexual wellness products marketed along what they can do for different stages of the menstrual cycle. So acne creams for your luteal phase, yoga workouts for your ovulation phase, and so on. And in this way, health is something that requires an investment of both time and money, which is articulated through the purchase of consumer goods and through the dedication of time, energy, and resources to fulfilling a medicalized self-care routine. So their marketing frequently runs aligned with healthcare activism, but their products are not necessarily disconnecting people who menstruate from pathologizing reproductive experiences. And rather than providing more access to products and services, the financial investment required in these routines is attainable only to those who can afford it. So at its core, financial investors claim to offer a better future for women and gender minorities as a guaranteed return on financial and personal investment. And certainly there are some real benefits to this kind of investment. For example, marketing to marginalized groups helps increase their visibility and mainstream their concerns. But it's important to recognize the outsized influence of venture capital and other financial investors who have the power to determine exactly which companies, which technologies, and which products are available for consumers to invest in, both financially and politically. Because of the sheer volume of capital that they manage, these investors are able to dictate the future of women's health technologies, and the extent to which their visions are predicated on certain market-driven outcomes may limit future visions of what women's health is and what it can be. On the consumer level, therefore, the results of health justice-driven purchasing simply help to produce the desired outcomes for these key financial investors, which may or may not include real steps towards gender equity. So this kind of framework may limit the potential for other kinds of actions that might be taken beyond the business world. And of course, market-driven and produced interventions are important for producing women's health justice. However, attempting to produce gender equity strictly through market-driven strategies may limit our ability to envision larger potential structural changes that don't rely on the financial sector and its particular vision of women's health. Venture capital firms tend to be disproportionately composed of white cis males and have historically created solutions that favor these groups. Venture capital firms, like the ones we talked about today, aim to create space for minoritized groups, especially women, within these structures. Yet creating space is not the same thing as dismantling, and creating more space for women to participate in the structures that produce these inequalities does not necessarily end it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Jasmine, please.
Yeah, Cole, if you could go ahead and share my slides. I'm also gonna turn my camera off while I present just because my internet is being a bit wonky, and I want to make sure that the presentation runs as smoothly as possible.
Okay, how's that look?
Perfect.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine, and I today will be talking to you about the health costs of immoral budgets. So Jamie very much gave us a wonderful presentation about the private sector spending on women's health and how that has it been impacting it. And this will look at more of the public sector and specifically the government funding on women's health or lack thereof. So then if you could go to the next slide. Oh, I think oh no, this is it. So the mainstream ideas of what security means and how we define it are definitely dominated by a very two-dimensional understanding of the term, which is bolstered by policy and messaging pushed by pro-military voices to assert that security just means military weaponry systems, a military response to any sort of quote unquote threat that our nation might face, and that's it. But in our current day and age, we have found that that is just not the case. There are so many security threats that threaten the security not just of our nation, but of our communities, of people. And I think a huge example of that is the COVID-19 pandemic. That was a non-military threat that absolutely decimated our economy, that decimated our population, our public health infrastructure, and not just in the US, but around the world. And it's killed over 1 million Americans in now almost 4 years. So we definitely have an outdated idea of what security means, and that's exacerbating these the poly crisis that we're facing of climate change, of food insecurity, of militarism and nuclear war, and so on. And so we really need to update our understanding of security. We need to expand it to be more intersectional, to understand that human security is national security. That when we take care of our citizens, when we take care of each other, that is when our nations, our communities are at their most secure. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share some numbers about how much we actually spend on not just public health, but women's health in particular. And it's very interesting when compared to, again, Jamie's presentation, when private companies are spending, $75 billion a year on their investments, quote unquote, in women's health, whatever that may be. And meanwhile, the US government is spending a whopping $4.8 billion a year around on women's health. And that is to compare that, we are just this last year, we spent $816.7 billion on the military. And so I just wanted to show this graph that indicates the stark difference in our investments in just stockpiling weapons of war, weapons that only cause mass death and destruction, versus investing in health and the health of over half of our nation's population. And definitely in line with the Poor People's campaigns and others' assertion that budgets are a moral document. What our government decides to spend its money on shows what our government and our leaders care about. And what they're telling us is that they don't care about our health as women, as human beings, and that they prioritize profit and power over any sort of safety and security for its citizens. And it's quite frankly, it's unsustainable, as well as unjust. And we absolutely have to change course if we are going to not just survive but thrive as a country. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And so I'll go a bit more into the lack of funding, but then I wanted to discuss more about what this rampant militarism means for women and how it manifests in society. So, I mean, just to start off, just because majority of our government spending, which is actually about over half of all discretionary spending by the government, is going towards the military. And within that, about half of that, if not more, is going just directly to weapons or manufacturers. So it's not actually going towards any sort of security. It's just enriching a select few people who build these weapons that then go and kill innocent people in our country and around the world. Um, and but within that, like small funding that's then allocated to the rest of our government's responsibilities, including public health, that is not distributed evenly. In fact, research has shown that men's health is more funded than women's health, even when it comes to diseases that have a higher burden of disease, like ovarian and cervical cancers. And there was an article in 2021 in Nature Journal. Researchers shared that ovarian cancer, for instance, ranks fifth in terms of lethality, fifth in most lethal diseases, but 12th in terms of funding to lethality ratio. And they found that cervical cancer follows a very similar pattern. And the article also found that actually increasing funding for women's health can save the government and companies that invested in money over time by improving the quality of life and productivity of society. So it's really in everyone's best interest to be funding women's health. And yet, and those who are most harmed by systemic oppression, because as we've seen that when we do, everyone benefits, but that doesn't benefit those in power. So we continue to see a just drastic misprioritization of funds. And so then with all of these weapons, when all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So the US is constantly involved in conflict around the world, starting conflict to achieve full spectrum dominance, many reasons. And as most of us probably know, conflict has a tendency to increase incidences of gender-based sexual violence, rape, sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancies, human trafficking, food insecurity, and displacement. And it also disrupts essential services to access vital health services like reproductive health services. And women rely more heavily on healthcare in general than men. So any sort of conflict that disrupts that will disproportionately harm women. And research has shown too that more than half of the world's conflict-related refugee population is made up of women and children. And so this is definitely a huge issue. And to get more specific, just because I am a nuclear weapons expert, a nuclear weapons abolitionist, I wanted to get into the nuclear dimension as well, because our government spends around between $40 and $50 billion a year on our nuclear arsenal. And over the next 10-year period or so, the CBO found that the government will be spending an additional $756 billion on our nuclear arsenal. And that money alone would be massive for improving women's health, improving research in women's health, better understanding all of the health issues that women face. And yet it's going to maintain these weapons that sit in silos that are harming communities through radiation exposure and radioactive contamination. And because there's this belief that these weapons don't cause harm unless they're detonated, but that's not true. They cause harm at every stage of development, production, maintenance, and use. And this radiation exposure disproportionately harms women and children because it embeds itself in fatty tissue, of which women have more of due to their reproductive role. And so as a result, for every 2 men who develop cancer through exposure to ionizing radiation, 3 women will get the disease.
Hmm.
And to go further, while children as a whole are more harmed by radiation than adults, infant and young girls, when exposed, run the highest risk of cancers across their lifetime. And as well, teenage girls will suffer almost double the rates of cancer compared to boys in the same age group and at the same level of exposure. And so these weapons, even if they're not being used in any sort of conflict, are leaking into the environment. They are contaminating the environment. They are harming communities within the US and around the world. And that harm itself, again, it disproportionately impacts women and children. And so we see time and time again that it is women who are most harmed. And yet there is so little funding to combat or address any of these harms. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And so there's definitely action that we can take to remediate this and to help invest more in women's health and to try and reprioritize how our government spends its money. And I mean, that begins with trying to get our government um, to reallocate its funding. There is no need to spend almost $1 trillion a year on military spending when the Department of Defense cannot pass an audit, is rampant with waste, fraud, and abuse. And research has shown that just a $100 billion cut to the military budget would be more than enough to address human security needs in this country while still maintaining military readiness. And so this is feasible. In the past, Representatives Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan have championed a bill in Congress called the People of the Pentagon Act to try and get congressional support to reduce the military budget by this amount and reinvest that into human security needs. We have yet to get it passed, but Public Citizen and the People of the Pentagon Coalition are still working hard to make progress on that and to influence more members of Congress to co-sponsor that. But as we know, the military-industrial complex is deeply embedded in our government, so it's gonna be a long fight to win, but it's definitely achievable. And one way to help build this power is we need to build the people power. We need to get more people knowledgeable about this issue and the disparity in funding towards women's health and military spending. We need to build bridges with other movements for social justice because this is going to take a lot of people to create this political power to demand that our leaders prioritize people over profit and power. But again, it's absolutely doable. The Poor People's Campaign is one movement that is working tirelessly to build this momentum across the nation to influence our members of Congress and our leaders to reprioritize government funding and to take care of our people. But as activists, it's also our role to build those bridges with other movements to build that power to educate others on these issues and get them to take action. And so I don't think I really need to explain that too much to y'all because y'all are already in that. And if for any health professionals in the room, the health voice absolutely matters. All our voices matter, speaking up any way that we can and bringing attention to these issues is so important. But especially if you're a health professional, despite some of the damage in trust to science and public health over the past few years, there is still a great respect for health professionals. And so the more that health professionals are engaging on this issue, the more that we can engage them on these issues, the better, because they don't learn about this in medical school. They're not taught about these issues. They're not taught about the medical industry's role in the military industrial complex. So any way, again, that we can help educate and advocate on these issues and get others to then speak up, the better. And then one more slide. And one thing you can do right now too is scan the QR code, and I will also drop the link in the chat. And this is to sign a petition to demand Congress to not abandon nuclear victims. So there is a program instated by the government at the moment that provides partial compensation to nuclear victims, but it's not enough. It actually expires this summer. And so we're working to extend and expand it. So sign this petition, add your name to demand that Congress not abandon these victims because they deserve all of the help and compensation that they can get due to US government negligence during the Cold War. And that is it. So thank you so much. And I'm excited to get to the Q&A portion.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Martha, please.
Nice bird. Just a couple of quick points before I get to my comments. And that was, Jamie, I noticed that when we're talking about what Finance Capital has to say about women's health, note that they never, ever, ever talk about social class. And I appreciated that Jasmine brought in the Poor People's Campaign and the class question, because every dollar spent on the military is a dollar not spent on human needs. And I wanted, Jasmine, just because you didn't say it, and you probably know this, I think it's a fascinating fact that every year Congress gives the military more money than it asked for. Say, no, please don't give us this much money. It was, the last time I heard, about $40 billion in an 800 billion, out of 800 billion, whatever. Would that there were any other aspect of our budget where Congress threw more money at the issue, like, say, feeding people or healthcare. Wouldn't that be nice? I also want to just quick shout out, Catherine said that this was International Women's Day Eve, and I remind myself every year that I won't say how long ago, very long ago, I defended my dissertation on International Women's Day. It was a dissertation about childbirth. So I have long been involved in issues around women's health. And what happened, because of how we see our inability to get decent health care, is that I moved over from being super, super active in women's health and especially birth and midwifery support and that kind of stuff into concern about us getting national health care in the United States. Long overdue. Quick shout out, I see a couple of colleagues from PNHP, Physicians for a National Health Program, as well as APHA, American Public Health Association, where Catherine first invited me to give this presentation last November. So, among other things in my extremely lengthy history that I won't elaborate on a lot, is that I spent a few years living in the province of Saskatchewan in Canada and experienced firsthand what it was like to have healthcare. And I did some research on healthcare in Canada. I've written a few things about it. And one example that I wanted to share with you, I think really tells the whole story. I was in Victoria, British Columbia, talking to a working class couple. How did I find them? They happened to be neighbors of a friend of mine. He was a firefighter. She was a nurse's aide in long-term care. And they were telling me a story about one of their three kids who was a teenager who had something wrong with him. It was very clear that something was seriously wrong with him. They took him to his doctor, nothing, no idea. They took him to a bunch of different doctors. They were complaining to me about the healthcare system because it took them 6 doctors before somebody diagnosed this teenager with a brain tumor. After which point, he had surgery and follow-up care, and he's doing just fine. Thank you very much. And that made me think about, and this ties in with our interest in women's health in particular, when you, A, don't have health insurance at all, B, have extremely limited health insurance where you can only go to the doctor that's in your network, that kid in the United States would never have survived. That working class couple would never have been able to take him to half a dozen different doctors who, and finally get a diagnosis and get treatment. And by the way, not bankrupt themselves in the process, because of course they didn't pay a dime for any of that extremely complex world-class care. So I think of that when I remember a time. I mean, I'm relatively privileged. I've almost always had good health care. I'm an employee of the state of New York as part of the university system. But even so, there have been times when I've had limited access or access to a very limited panel of doctors. And every female on this call knows exactly the difference between an internal done by a competent caring professional and the other kind of internal exam. And that's the kind of thing that Canadian women don't have to worry about. You didn't like the internal you got from this bozo? You find another doctor. Case closed. End of story. That's the kind of access to care that we need in the United States. For the last 50 years, the women's health movement, I mean, Jamie showed a picture of the first edition of Our Bodies, Ourselves. I used many editions of that in teaching women's health over the years. I've gotten to know, and probably some of you in Massachusetts know some of the founding mothers of the Boston Women's Health Book Collective, who are wonderful people. Not long after that, the National Women's Health Network was created in the mid-1970s, and then in the early 80s by Billy Avery and others, the National Black Women's Health Project. All stupendous organizations devoted to dealing with the issue that we deal with as women confronting the medical system. That is the paradox of over-doctoring of our complicated female parts and under-doctoring of the rest of our parts. And we know the history about really not understanding, for example, the symptoms women present with when having a heart attack. I was delighted. About 5 years ago, I wound up in the ER with shortness of breath, and I was tickled because the young docs there were ruling out heart attack. And I said to myself, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have had a clue. So clearly somebody was on that message in medical school a little more than they had been previously. But it's taken us half a century and we're nowhere close to where we need to be. And Jamie, I'm just disgusted at the marketing of women's health care in the way that you share. I'm not even slightly surprised, but it is just disgusting. So what happened with me, as I say, about 30 years ago, I said, we really need to address this national health care thing because we're not going to get anything like the kind of health care we need. Many of my colleagues in Physicians for a National Health Program are wonderful progressive people. They don't necessarily share the view of medical care and especially women's health care that I understand. And there I'm talking about that dichotomy of over-doctoring, by which I mean the medicalization of birth, the medical versus midwifery models of birth, the medicalization of menopause, which, as Jamie pointed out, is being marketized dramatically. And so for that reason, and also for the reason that we need to broaden out our focus and talk about the social determinants of health, especially women's health, and the public health perspective on the difference between health and health care. Those are the big picture issues that I'm concerned about, that I've been active on. And I've been working on this, as I say, since actually I joined Physicians for National Health Program in 1992. One of the happiest moments of my life in this work was that in 1994, when PNHP had its national meeting in Chicago, into that room walked one of my sheroes, and that is Ina May Gaskin, who, if anybody knows, is the author of Spiritual Midwifery and an internationally recognized direct entry midwifery advocate. And there I was at a board table with all these docs and Ina May.
Mhm.
I said, this is exactly what we need. We need to knock down those silos. We're not going to agree on a lot of other stuff, but we absolutely agree that the floor is healthcare as a right. And as they say in PNHP, if you pass the fog a mirror test, you're in. Get it? Get it? That's if you're breathing, you fog a mirror, right? So if you're breathing in the United States of America, you need health care. One of my other favorite people in the world is Bernie Sanders. And a couple years ago, he said in one gathering where somebody was complaining, as you sometimes hear, some idiot was saying, why should I have to pay for the health care of somebody who whatever that person's complaint was? And Bernie said, because they're a human being, for crying out loud. It really is that simple.
Mhm.
And what's happening is that every day that we don't have national health, at least insurance, improved Medicare for all, as we say, every day we don't have it, the bad guys are not sitting still. They're financializing up a storm. They are going after Medicare so that something approaching half of Medicare recipients are now on what they disgustingly call Medicare Advantage, which is
Mhm.
absolutely what we call Medicare Disadvantage. It's a really despicable way of cherry picking and profitizing off of healthy seniors. And what happens is it's great. Hey, I get free gym membership, silver sneakers, cool. You're going to pay for my hearing aids. The minute you get sick as an elder on one of those disadvantaged plans, you're screwed. And what you want to do, and in PNHP, we say the healthy go in, the sick come out. People demand to get back into public Medicare so that they can get the care they need without having to go through the same BS that the rest of us go through about prior authorization and networks and all of that garbage. So while we're not getting this done, private equity and finance capital are getting their disgusting claws on more and more and more of our taxpayers' money that should be funding publicly financed healthcare for all. The only thing wrong with there's two things wrong with Medicare, traditional public Medicare as it stands. One is it doesn't cover everything. We need to fix that. That's why we in PNHP say improved Medicare for all. The other thing is you have to live till 65 to get it. We say let's start at zero.
Mhm.
And that's what we have to do. And my mission here on this call is to encourage people to link up with organizations and community groups and such that are fighting for this. In New York State, we have the New York Health Act, which is this kind of legislation at the state level. If you're in New York, love to have you aboard. But I don't know if we can put, I don't know how to do this stuff, but pnhp.org is how to link up with Physicians for National Health Program. P.S. I'm not a physician. I've been active in this group for 30 years and change, and everybody is most welcome. Healthcarenow.org, you all in the Boston area probably know the wonderful folks who head up healthcare now. Thank you, Jamie. Excellent. I appreciate that. And the other group that I'm involved with, you see the signs behind me. One is guaranteed health care for the New York Health Act, and the other is about being in a union. So I'm active in my union, and we have I'm sorry?
1 minute.
Yes, dear. The last sentence was laborforsinglepayer.org. That is a national organization of union members and activists and leaders advocating for Medicare for all of us. So those are three possible ways for you to connect up. And that's it, Catherine. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. And thank you, Jamie, for doing that.
Thank you all very, very much. I suspect that the rest of us have learned at least as much as I have learned tonight, and I really appreciate having such wonderful and knowledgeable speakers here. Martha mentioned a couple of things that we sent out. I'm not sure if I've already mentioned it, but you all will be receiving a resource page that we put together that relates to some of the issues. It's not going to be in its entirety, but it's something to lead you on. And we're especially grateful to Jamie and Jasmine because they have given us permission to use their slides. So you will get an opportunity to see their slides over again and ruminate on them. So I will now put it over to Bonnie. Do you have any questions for us?
Yes, there are a few questions, and then people may want to ask some questions from the floor. One is directed to Jamie, but really can apply to everybody. It's the Alabama ruling that fertilized eggs are legally children. Now that's been reversed by the state legislature, but it's still going to be in play. Any comments from all of you on that particular issue?
My comment is how low can we go? Ever since Dobbs, we are just sinking lower and lower and lower. And you know what? The same people who are concerned about cryogenically frozen embryos are the very same people who don't give a tinker's damn about born children. And that's a point that I think
know,
we
and it's
need
been
to
like
keep
that
making
forever.
over and over again. By the way, that reminds me, George Carlin, you can look this up, absolutely fantastic on the subject of right to life. Just Google George Carlin, right to life, and you will, he's much funnier than I am on the subject.
And I think that the overall issue for all presenters and how do we promote the political nature of women's health in terms of really highlighting advocacy on a federal and state level. The feds are not doing a great deal, so we can do more at the state level. And it's what are your suggestions? We've already heard some from you. Any other thoughts or suggestions on that front?
Sorry, off topic, but
yeah, go right ahead.
Off topic, but I see that one of our participants, Mateo, would like to ask a question.
Oh, okay. I didn't see the questions. So here we go. I don't have visuals on the questions. Mateo, are you on? Can you address the group?
Oh, okay.
You need to unmute. There you go.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see a Q&A tab, so I just posted it in the chat. Wonderful presentations. Thank you all very, very much. I had a question specifically for Jamie, but I think it's probably also applicable to the other presenters as well. your presentation just makes me think a lot about the self-optimization language that's very present in neoliberalism, and I know that's something that you also study. So just love to hear your thoughts on how those two kind of intersect or even diverge.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I'm sorry if my audio is wonky. I shifted to the phone so that if my internet cut out, everyone could hear me. But I think they're incredibly connected. The rise of neoliberalism, neoliberal feminism as an ideology in particular, and the focus on individual responsibility, individual action, I think this completely informs the rhetoric of this marketing. And I think it makes it much more appealing to people who are so used to hearing this kind of rhetoric, the idea that you can make individual choices that can solve these systemic problems without really joining collective community action. That wouldn't make sense without this broader neoliberal framework. So I think, one could not exist without the other. And this, investment feminism rhetoric that they're drawing on is completely made possible by much broader neoliberal frameworks overall. And really quick, while I'm speaking, to go back to the first question about Alabama, I was just in a talk last night and I was listening to the incredible Dorothy Roberts, social justice advocate, and she pointed out something that I think is so incredible, which is that it is not illegal to freeze the embryos in Alabama. It is just, the ruling was only about destroying them. And so I think in some ways, when you think about some of the stuff that I've been talking about today and the way that it relates, it doesn't, obviously they're scrambling to figure out what to do, and it did halt IVF, but this is a very specific, if it is in fact a child and has the rights of a child, wouldn't freezing that child be just as horrific? But it's not, right? So there's a real slipperiness with the way that they're going about this that she pointed out, and I think was just really fascinating to think through sort of the ways that they're thinking about these things and these technologies and this concept of fetal personhood in ways that don't disrupt all of the business incentives involved.
Thank you. A comment: predatory capitalism and big money have shown us how they dominate Congress in the current struggles for peace in Gaza and Ukraine. Can you speak to how to move forward in our struggle for improved Medicare for all? Thanks to Martha for the names of the groups for the joining. So, anybody want to tackle that one? Capitalism, as we are taken over in Massachusetts by the Stewart for-profit healthcare system. We know the dangers. So, your thoughts, Martha? Yes, I see your hand.
So thank you. So here's the interesting thing about this. I stand second to none in my eagerness to move past capitalism into a more just society. And yet, the thing that we're advocating when we advocate for improved Medicare for all is not a revolutionary demand at all. Every other wealthy capitalist country on the planet has achieved some version of health care for all. Switzerland, for crying out loud. Switzerland, right? South Africa. Just name the capitalist country, a wealthy capitalist country, and some not so wealthy, and they've all got it except us. So here, but you don't have to be an anti-capitalist to be in this movement. And there's an awful lot more Americans who are in the movement who are not seeing it as necessarily a question of having to eliminate capitalism to get there. We don't have to do that. Everybody else did it, including my friends in Canada. Thanks.
Exactly. And they're all capitalists as well. So we have a note from Judy Norsegian, who is here with us tonight. Judy, speak up. Say hello to everybody. You were being lauded earlier in the program. Is she? Maybe she's not on board. She sends greetings.
So what's the name, Bonnie? I have to.
Judy Norsegian.
Judy.
Narsegian with an N.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You can unmute, Judy.
Okay, I wasn't allowed to unmute.
Sorry. Have to.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get on and it was blocked. Just saying hello, and I'm really happy to see you, Martha. It's been ages. Such a long time. These are such important issues, and the big money, the venture capitalists, the steward health types, they really have invaded. And I don't know that we have a clear strategy for how to deal with it, because so much else is going on in people's lives. They cannot tackle this issue because it looks too complicated. So one of the challenges is making it simple enough to understand. And Martha, I'm glad you said what you did, because you don't have to be against capitalism to advocate for some of what we need. But, the other problem is that we don't have a movement the way we did earlier. Back in the 90s, we had all these women's health groups talking about a single payer approach. We even had an op-ed in the Boston Globe, which a physician co-authored with me, and her CEO at the hospital disagreed with her totally, but said, write what you want. It was very interesting to see those times. And we had 6 principles in our statement. And, we advocated for a long time. Meiju Louis was very active in that whole effort. She's now in Hawaii. But it's not impossible to rejuvenate all those efforts. And once our bodies ourselves has passed this stage of transition, we're not sure quite where the home will be. We're hoping it will be Suffolk University. I believe that we can get much more active in advocacy around issues like this. There'll be hopefully staffing for it, not just volunteer labor, but it's going to take volunteer labor in addition. But it's an educational campaign is really critical too. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, it's great to see everyone.
And Jasmine, you had your hand up?
Oh yeah, briefly, I was just going to respond to the question about how to move forward in the struggle for improved Medicare for all. And just something that came to mind, and I mentioned in my presentation too, was I think it'll be really crucial to all of these movements for social justice to work together in tandem. And it's not necessarily creating one mass movement, because that can get unwieldy, that can seem a bit difficult to think about and to execute in real life. But building connections with movements and working in tandem to help attack these interlocking systems of oppression from many different angles. And I think that's definitely what's needed. And so like the health justice and women's health justice, like teaming up, for instance, with the anti-militarism groups and those who are working to reduce the military budget, because they always say that, where are we going to get the money for Medicare for all? Where are we going to get the money for all of these social programs? And it's like, well, we can cut it from the military. We have research that proves that we can cut this amount and still have the military readiness, and then also address these problems. And so I think just building these intersectional movements, building these connections with other movements will be really helpful, I think, in creating more dynamic messaging and bringing people in and kind of attacking these problems from maybe new ways that we hadn't thought of before. So I think that'll be really huge for all movements for social justice moving forward. It's like we need to work together because we're so disparate and so all over the place that any sort of cohesion to build some sort of like force of power will be really, really impactful to achieve our goals.
The big tent approach. And Martha.
Yeah, so Judy, so great to hear from you and see you on screen. And your comments reminded me of a couple of things that I think are really helpful to people who want to be active in this movement. There's 2 things standing in our way, right? The first is we need the vision that we can have this here. You know how people say we can't have good things, we can't have nice things? We can have nice things if we bloody well fight for them. Every other rich blah, 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 they've all got it. Why can't we have it? Of course we can have it. Get that vision in your head. And this, Jasmine, is where that vision of all of the nice things comes in. The bad guys understand that if we get health care for all, there's no stopping us. Oh my God, we might want free public
Socialization.
education. We might want to feed children. How, we might want affordable housing, et cetera, et cetera. So they're no dummies. They know exactly why they need this movement not to happen. The other piece besides vision is the piece about power. The only reason we don't have this yet is the bad guys are really big and powerful. And the healthcare portion of our economy is over 1/6 at this point.
Right.
We
Yeah.
spend a far larger proportion of our funding of our wealth on healthcare, mostly to fund profit. So much, about 40 to 50% of what we spend money on has nothing to do with giving people health care, has to do with people making profits. The final piece I want to say is also about empowerment. What we often hear when the bad guys hear us demand health care is they say, oh dear, you don't understand. This is really complicated. And it's very easy to throw out terms like monopsony payer, which would scare anybody away. Because what the hell, who knows? Oh, I guess they're right. It is complicated. No, it isn't. We spend more than every other country on the planet for healthcare. We are alone in failing to provide healthcare for all our people. We need this. It's the right thing to do. Shut up. Get out of our way. Let's go get it.
Well, and I think on that note, I'll pass it over to Catherine. Thank you so much, everybody, from my point of view. And Catherine, yes, you want to?
Thank you. I agree with you, Bonnie, and I first of all want to thank our wonderful speakers. You have
Just great, very inspirational.
talked for three more hours, and maybe we'll be convinced to have another presentation with all of you, because it's wonderful what all of you have said. And I thank all of you in the audience who have participated. Thank you for your attendance. As I mentioned, you'll all be receiving a resource page in the either tomorrow or on beginning of next week. And just to let you know that Massachusetts Peace Action is planning another couple of, well, they're planning many, many webinars relating to a lot of the issues, but with the Fund Healthcare Not Warfare working group, we will be having a webinar in April on the Stewart case, which is private equity. And it started out being a super dysfunctional issue in Massachusetts, but because Stewart is throughout the country, they are now having the issues in Florida, Texas, and other parts, so that you will all receive information about that. And our next Women Seeking Women's Health Justice webinar will be in May, probably the last week of May, because it will be just before Memorial Day. And to honor Memorial Day in a way that they probably don't want us to honor it, we will be having a webinar on Seeking Women's Health Justice, Women's Veterans. So that's for it. So thank you all for attending, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Take care.